Okay, making another video. I think that you guys will really enjoy this one. The title of the video is The Cosmic Food Chain. So, I just wanted to make a quick disclaimer that this video is not to be taken as absolute truth. I am going to be referring to the absolute truth at certain points in the video just for the explanation. However, the conclusions that I draw as a consequence of that are not to be taken as absolute truth themselves. This is more of a speculative video. So it's uncertain if this is the case. However, it's a possibility, and I just want to state the possibility, and you can think about it and come to a conclusion yourself if you think it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, but all I ask is that you remain open-minded and at least watch the video till the end, and then you guys can give me your comments and let me know what you think. As I said, I will be referring to the absolute truth. However, if you are not sure what I'm referring to when I say that, then I would recommend you watch my first three core videos, like my first three videos about absolute and relative truth. And there's a few of my other videos. Pretty much all of my videos are based off that. Anyway, let's get into it. So, I want to speak about this idea of the Demiurge or Archons, or essentially just the idea that God, or the creator of this world or this simulation, if you think it's a simulation, if this God is some sort of parasitic God that is feeding off us. So usually in the religious sense, or just anyone that believes in God usually thinks of God as all good, that this creation was for a good purpose, for good reason, it's for our benefit. However, there's this kind of Gnostic view on things where it kind of goes contrary to that, and it says that, in a sense, God is evil, and the Demiurge or the Archons, or whatever you want to call them, essentially what is above us, which created this reality for us. It didn't create it for us for a good reason, or for our own development, or for our benefit, but for its own benefit at our expense. That's essentially kind of what this idea is of the Demiurge and so on. I'm going to get into that a lot later on in the video, so just stick with me. But first, I want to explain this concept, which I've touched on before a little bit. It's holons. What is a holon? So the average person, if you ask them what reality is made out of, they're going to say matter, or atoms, or strings, or whatever. It doesn't really matter what they say. Essentially, what they think that reality is made out of is small, very small units as building blocks. So, for example, if you're watching this video on the screen like this, it may look like there's a human there. That's not really like a human. You're just seeing pixels, which are very small. Like, your screen is made out of very small pixels, so small that you can't see it. And they're just displaying light in a particular fashion to where it appears like there's a human on the screen now. So pixels, that's like one analogy of kind of these small units which build up reality. So, for example, the screen, like pixels are making up that screen, and then you could say this piece of paper is made out of like small atoms, And pretty much everything is made out of these small building blocks. And there's this idea that, yeah, you could say it's atoms or whatever, even though now with modern science, this is already being disproven because atoms is 99.9% empty space. Um, it's Scientists aren't even sure if these atoms or whatever are made out of particles or if it's a wave. They're not sure if it's a wave or a particle. It's different depending on if subjects are observing them or measuring them or not. So when it's not being measured, it's a wave, and when it's being measured or observed, it collapses into a particle. So, of course, this links in with quantum mechanics and all of that. I don't want to go too deep into that. However, this idea of reality being constructed out of these smaller building blocks, these units, this is essentially the ground and the fundamental assumption of materiality, or just the material paradigm. Just the idea that this universe is a physical universe made out of material, made out of matter, essentially. And even when people appear to have transcended that belief on a surface level, like on an intellectual understanding, when it comes to how they act within reality, they will still act as if it's made out of matter. They might say, yeah, it's just consciousness or it's just energy, but they're still going to act as if it's made out of matter and as if this reality really is a physical universe. When in many of my other videos, I've kind of debunked the material paradigm. I'll maybe make another separate video that specifically debunks that, but I can't go too deep into that in this video right now. Again, a lot of that is covered in my first 3 videos, so if you're new, then again, watch those. But so holons, why am I speaking about holons? Essentially, what I explained as well in my first 3 videos is that reality isn't made out of these units, these kind of building blocks, but a more accurate substitute for atoms is holons. That actually the whole of reality is made out of holons. And what are holons? I'm going to explain that. So holons is a very simple concept. It just means that something is a whole while simultaneously being a part. So for example, if we're just speaking about my human body, this human body is a whole human body, right? It's just one whole human body. But it's made out of smaller parts, like it's made out of my head, my torso, my limbs, see what I'm saying, my legs, and so on and so forth. And then let's say one of my limbs, like there's two arms, right? So let's just take one of these arms. This arm is a whole arm. And it's also made of smaller parts. See, like my bicep, my tricep, my forearm, my hand, my wrist. And then you could take just this hand, which is a part of this, which is a part that makes up this whole arm, right? And this hand is also its own whole. And it's also made of smaller parts, like my fingers, my palm. See what I'm saying? And then you could take one of these fingers, that's also its own whole. So you could keep on zooming in and in and in, and you realize that everything is its own whole, and it's made of smaller sub-pieces. And then you can zoom in onto those sub-pieces, and each of those sub-pieces are their own whole category, and they're also made of smaller sub-pieces. So you can do that, you can zoom in, but at the same time you can zoom out. So this whole human, this is his whole, like, own individual human, right? But I'm a part of my family unit. And that family unit is its own whole. And that family unit is a part of, like, you could say society, like, or let's say, because I live in England, then you could say, oh, my family is a part of the larger, like, family of the UK, the United Kingdom, that country. And then that country, even though now with Brexit, the UK is not in Europe, but for example, before, like, this country of England is its own whole, but it's just a part of Europe. And Europe is its own whole, but it's just a part of the world. And the world is its own whole, but it's just a part of the solar system. And the solar system is its own whole, but it's just a part of the galaxy, and so on and so forth. So this is essentially showing that the universe is holographic. The universe is a hologram. This is what holographic really means, is that everything is created out of holons, where everything is a whole and a part at the same time. And there's actually no, see, and where scientists go wrong is this idea of Planck's length. And this is even like one of the grounds which they base the idea that everything is made out of atoms, or these singular units. Because for reality to be made out of these singular units, there has to be a bottom, right? There has to be like the lowest that you can go. Like there has to be a smallest. There has to be a smallest and a biggest. And then you could say it's made out of these units which are at the smallest level, like the very smallest. You go to the bottom and there's these very small units and you can't go below that. And in a sense, they kind of validate this, or they rationalize this with Planck's length. This idea that there's a smallest, like the kind of smallest amount of measurement of unit of measurement where things still mean something. Like if you go below that, then nothing means anything anymore. Like see that Planck's length, that's just a clever trick to, because when they go below the Planck's length, then they can't explain things with their past paradigms. It starts to debunk their current paradigms, and they can't allow that. So they will just say, anything below that, it doesn't make sense. It's no longer valid. But why? Who made that? A human made that. There's no such thing as the Planck's length. There's actually no bottom. There's no smallest and there's no biggest, because everything's made out of holons. See, it's literally like you can go on YouTube, you can type in Mandelbrot fractal zoom. This is how fractals occur, is that everything is just made out of holons. So you can zoom in, like you could take this hand and zoom in like forever. You could zoom in and there's going to be a whole universe just in this hand. And then you could pick one section of that and zoom in and keep on zooming in, and you'll never reach the bottom. It'll keep on getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and it'll keep on going down. And same way with the universe. Like if you look out into space, it's quite clear. There's no edge, right? There's no end. Like how could there be an end? So it just keeps on zooming out forever. You can zoom out forever and zoom in forever, because the universe is a hologram. And see, because you can zoom out forever and zoom in forever, that's why no matter, like any point of reference within this field of consciousness is always going to be in the middle. That's why everyone always thinks that they're in the middle of the universe. Because since the field is infinite and it has infinite coordinates, and no coordinate is the real center, because there's no edge. Like you could say if there was an edge, there was just a circle, then you could say that's the center. But because there's no edge, there's no center, because it's boundless. So because there's no center, any coordinate you take will be the center then. See, it's not the true center, but it can be taken to be the center or appear as the center. So that's why you could be here as a human and it feels like you're in the middle of the universe, right? Like it feels like like it's happening to you. Life is happening to you. And then you could walk 100 meters that way and it'll still feel like you're in the middle. And like you can remember back to when you was 5 years old. See, it might seem now like 5 years old, that was back then, like you weren't. But when you was there, you was right there in the middle. It was in the middle. And now here, like when you was 5 years old and you thought, what would life be like when you're 30 or 40? It seems so far away, like that would be somewhere else. But look, when you get here, it's here now, right in the middle. So no matter where you go, since reality has no edge and there's no scale, you can zoom in or out forever. And scale is only occurs as a sort of measurement comparing two reference points. So really, there's no such thing as big or small. There's only big in comparison to something else, or there's only small in comparison to something else. That's why you could say one human is tall, but then if you measure them against a human that's taller than them, they're now short. See? So there's no such thing as absolutely tall or absolutely small or absolutely big. You see what I'm saying? That like all of that is relative. And I explain all of this in my like first 3 videos. So This will be paramount to my explanations later with the Demiurge and so on. I just need to kind of lay the foundation. So a good example of like these holons, even though everything's a holon, but for example, just a classic embodiment of it is the Russian dolls. See the Russian dolls where it has like one doll and then another doll and a doll inside a doll inside a doll inside a doll, and then you open it and then there's just another smaller one, and you just open it and there's another smaller one. Of course, because it's a physical thing, it has to have like some sort of limit, so it doesn't zoom in and out forever with those Russian dolls. But you could imagine the same way those Russian dolls keep on expanding out. That's in a sense how the universe is. The universe is holographic, and everything is made out of these holons, which are a part and simultaneously a whole. As I've just explained earlier, like this human is its own whole, but it's also a part of the human race. And the human race is its own whole, but it's also a part of like the animal kingdom, and the animal kingdom is its own whole, but it's also a part of Earth, and so on and so forth. So you can zoom out forever and you can zoom in forever. There's no bottom. Okay, so this is all, and all of this is within the relative plane, which I again explained in my first few videos. But the relative plane, essentially all of life, everything you've ever experienced is within the relative plane, within the conditional dualistic plane. You've you as a human, you've never experienced anything outside of the relative plane. So I am speaking about the relative plane as if it's just one section of reality, but really it is all of reality. It's all of the perceivable reality which appears to exist. Anything that appears to exist, anything within existence is within the relative plane. And I'll explain the absolute again later as well. So, yeah, okay, the Russian dolls, that's one example. Again, I spoke about fractals, but fractals can also be like even numbers. Like you could think the number 1, and this almost represents the middle as well. Like 1 is in the middle in a sense, and then it can go to 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million, a billion, a trillion, and then that's to the right, and then to the left it goes 0.1, 0.001, 0.001, 0.0001, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. So you can scale down and you can scale up, and the center is always like the reference point, and we're always in the center, right? So fractals, that's like fractions and fractals. It's almost the same word, fractals and fractions, you see? So another one, yeah, I've already kind of explained the universe, the galaxy, the solar system, all of these, like literally, see, the solar system, and then that's part of a galaxy, and then that's part of the so on and so forth. So it always it goes out forever. Of course, us with humans, we have limited resources and tools and technology at the moment in time. So there's only a certain amount that we can see, and it may seem like, that there's nothing beyond what we can see, but there is. It just expands forever. Okay, so I've given a few examples of holons. Now let's get to, one second, I'll be right back. So yeah, to continue with this idea of the Archons or the Demiurge or Parasitic God, like I've been watching quite a few videos recently, and I've been hearing a lot of people speaking about this kind of idea. And as I said kind of earlier, it's in a sense the idea that God is evil, or maybe not evil, but it's indifferent to humans, and it's just using us for its own purposes, essentially. And it's feeding off us. That's in a sense a very bare bones idea of what this kind of demiurge is, and so on and so forth. And the idea that this God created this universe that we see, right? And that this universe, in a sense, is some kind of false simulation that was designed specifically to extract loosh from humanity. And loosh is, in a sense, negative energy. Like, for example, if you was to put a human, in a cage, like if you was to trap them in a cage, you lock them in a cage with 3 hungry lions, like one human, you put them in a cage with 3 hungry lions, they'll probably die very fast. But literally in that 1 minute when before they die, like they would be generating almost the highest amount of loosh. So loosh is, in a sense, fear, anxiety, uncertainty, dread, terror, all of these strong, very strong. See, emotions can be very strong in the positive and negative sense, right? However, it almost seems like negative emotions are almost slightly, they're not more powerful, but they are more, they have to be more stark and more like blatant and very, in a sense, they seem stronger, right? Negative emotions. And the reason why is because, for example, why fear is so strong and why it feels like fear. If you was, for example, in a life or death situation and you just nearly died, the amount of, imagine we could measure, because emotion is energy, right? And energy is just deviation. Like, remember, energy is zero. Energy can't be created or destroyed. So energy is just an oscillation and a deviation of zero. You could think of zero as the baseline, and energy or life is just, it's like a sine wave. It just deviates. And and like a small emotion will just be like deviations, but on a small level. And then like a large deviation, the deviation where it deviates and oscillates far from the baseline, that's a stronger emotion. The further it deviates, the stronger the emotion, in a sense. And that emotion, like if you was in a life or death situation and you just came out of the battlefield and you nearly got exploded or something like that, or you nearly just got eaten by a lion and all of this kind of stuff, like those emotions would be very strong. It would really like rattle your nervous system, because it would rattle it more than, for example, if you was chilling at home, feeling comfortable, having a nice cup of tea. Like, why is that? It's because that emotional fear needed to be so strong in order to keep, it needs to essentially give you a kick. It needs to give you a strong kick so that you get into gear and get the fuck out of that situation, because if you don't, you're going to die, right? So it needs fear and all of these kinds of emotions. They need to be very strong, because if the fear you felt was very small, like if you was in a life or death situation, but you didn't feel anything, like you would probably die very fast, because you wouldn't be able to recognize the danger of the situation. That's the whole reason why fear and all these emotions exist, right? It's like a strong warning sign, right? So all of that goes to say is that fear and all of these strong emotions, they create large deviations from the baseline. And in a sense, that's what this loosh is these strong deviations that that the Demiurge, in a sense, feeds off, right? Because, and it is in a sense true. I'll get to all of that, right? I just need to keep on building the foundation, right? So essentially, that's what loosh is. Loosh is created from, in a sense, human suffering, animal suffering, these strong negative emotions the idea is that this Demiurge or the Archons or whatever, right, that they feed of these negative emotions that the humans experience. And a lot of people that subscribe to this idea, that's kind of how they explain why there's so much suffering in the world, why there's so much war, so much poverty, is because in a sense the way they see it is that that this simulation, as I said, was created by the Demiurge, and it created it in such a way to where it's almost impossible, no matter how much humans try. Because if you ask any human, they will pretty much all of them will say that they want peace and they want to live in harmony and all of this stuff. But then why can't we achieve it? It's not because humans are incompetent or so on. It's because the devil, the Demiurge or whatever, this evil force is setting it up in such a way to where no matter how hard we try, humans will always create this loosh so that it can feed off it and continue to perpetuate itself, right? That's kind of how they would explain it. And there are many reasons why this idea can seem plausible or can seem like it is the case. And I'm not saying that it isn't the case or it is the case. I'm just kind of explaining the different viewpoints. And the reason why it can seem plausible again is for some of those reasons that I've said. Like even if you just look at what's happening in the modern world nowadays, the amount of wars that's going on, the inflation, the cost of living crisis, all of this stuff, like a lot of this stuff didn't even happen just by accident as well. Like a lot of this stuff is by design. So there is a lot of, I agree with a lot of the people who subscribe to these things. Like one of the main things that they say as well is just that how they emphasize how life is not this gift or this all good thing that how like society portrays it to be. Like if you ask most people in society, it's like, oh, life is such a gift, it's so perfect, the life's all good, what are you complaining about? Like we have technology now, like this and that. They act as if everything's fine, right? But there are a lot of things going on in the current society and going on in life right now that are way worse, way more insidious, way more evil than the common man would like to admit. So I do agree on that, and a lot of these things can make it seem plausible to make it seem that, wait, hold on, maybe there actually is something above us that's actually pulling the strings that doesn't have our best interest at heart, which is causing these things, right? However, there are some things where I disagree. See, where I would disagree, right? For example, like if we just think of this on a logical sense, like us as humans, right? We feed off animals, we feed off plants, a lot of different things. If you look at other animals, they feed off other animals. Again, because life actually is a zero-sum game, like it really is a zero-sum game. And energy is not a substantial thing. Energy is not in profit. It's always at zero. It must remain at zero because it's actually nothing. So it can only oscillate into credit and debt and oscillate into credit and debt. And I explained a lot of this in my money, energy, and zero-sum game video. But because life really is a zero-sum game and energy can't be created, for all these finite beings in limited forms to survive, they need to feed off other animals or other organisms to get their energy to sustain their own body, right? Because your body is, in a sense, it's like your body is like a battery, right? It's like it has charge. Like life is like a charge, and The moment you was born, like you had like high charge, and it's like as the more life you experience, the more your battery decreases and diminishes, right? And then like you can sort of refuel your charge or your battery by sleeping and eating and consuming, and you can kind of temporarily bring it up, but you can never bring it back to your full capacity. Like it keeps on coming down. You can bring it up like by sleeping and eating, bring it up and so on and so forth. But eventually it's going to eclipse the threshold to where when you go below that, that's death, right? So that can happen in many different ways through old age or through all these other things, right? But in a sense, that's kind of what it's like. Your body is an energetic like being, right? So this is why you need to constantly eat food and so on, because like your battery, it's not like if you do nothing, your battery stays up. Like your battery is diminishing by itself just as time progresses naturally. You see, because just by being alive, you're already expending energy. Just by breathing, just by your heart pumping, you're already expending energy. So you need to keep on replenishing it to keep yourself above that threshold so you don't die. So this is why all these animals are feeding off other animals to keep their energy up. And there's not an infinite amount of energy out here, like it's finite. That's why we need to eat all the others, and energy can't be created, right? So yes, it makes sense. This whole, a lot of all of this explanation, this kind of goes in hand with how these people think of the Archons or the Demiurge, to where they're saying that humans believe that we're at the top of the food chain, right? And that we're just feeding on all these others and we're at the top, but there's nothing above us. That's kind of what the common man thinks, right? But then the way these people look at it is that, hold on, what goes to say that we're at the top? Perhaps there's something above us that's feeding off us, that is at such a high level of advancement that we might not even be able to perceive it, or, you know, like how many times have we trapped chickens and and cows in like in the farms, and we're herding them just to slaughter them. Like they probably don't, like half of them probably don't even know until like the moment right before they die. Like half of them are probably oblivious. They don't even know what the fuck we're doing to them, because we're so more highly advanced than them. Like that chicken doesn't really fucking know like what's happening. It doesn't really know that it's being farmed. You see what I'm saying? For its meat and so on. So it's the same kind of psychology where we'll say, all right, cool, we're like way above them, and we can do this to them. So surely there's a possibility that there's something above us that we might not be able to perceive, or so on, some spiritual entity in the ether or whatever that is kind of spiritually being a vampire or being a parasite to the human race, right? And it's feeding off us. So this is kind of the idea. And that is very plausible. However, where I would disagree with some of these people is that they almost go to say that the demiurge or God or whatever, or this being that's feeding off like humans, they almost go to say as if like that is the highest. Like the highest thing, the creator or God or whatever, like the highest thing, which is feeding off us, humans, they almost make it seem like that's the highest thing. Like as if that's God or something, like the Demiurge or the Archons, like that's God. But I disagree with that. Because, see, when we're speaking about God, of course, it depends on what you define as God, right? But to me, this is where I'm bringing in the absolute truth as well. As I said, all of this stuff was within the relative plane, but at the absolute level, see, the absolute truth is the most fundamental thing that there is. So if we want to say that God is the most fundamental, then you have to say that God is the absolute truth. The truth which is true, absolutely, unconditionally, always. And the truth that is true acausally. The truth that has always been true. That was never not true. See, this is what I explain more in first three core videos. Again, if you're a bit confused about what I'm saying with the absolute truth, then you can watch those. But see, how can I explain this? See, the absolute truth, right, is the most fundamental thing there is. That's what everything is made out of. Everything is made out of itself, because that's what truth literally means. That's why I always say one is equal to one. That's the best analogy. One is equal to one. The truth is true. I am myself. I am I. That whole center of I am I, like I am that I am. It literally just means that it is itself. So everything is itself. So existence exists. Reality is real. Truth is true. False is false. Like false is not true. Like false is false, which means it negates itself, leaving only the truth. So there's the absolute truth, which is true always, not based on any conditions. All conditional or relative truths are within the relative plane, which is what I was speaking about, which is life. In life, every truth is relative and conditional. It might be true today, but it's not true tomorrow. It might be true, like if you ask him, he'll say it's true. And if you ask him, he'll say it's not true. See, all of that is relative. I'm speaking about at the absolute level. The truth that's true, no matter if someone is aware of it, if someone's conscious of it or not, if someone believes it or not, it doesn't matter. Like this absolute truth that I'm referring to is true unconditionally. It doesn't matter about any condition. Doesn't matter if humanity exists or not, the truth will still be true. Doesn't matter if I made this video or not, the truth will still be true. It doesn't matter if I make the video, you believe it or you disbelieve it, or you agree with it or disagree with it. None of these things changes what the absolute truth is. If what you believe changes what the truth is, then you already know it's just on the relative plane. It's just a relative truth. See, so the most fundamental thing is absolute truth. And absolute truth, the only thing you can say about it is that it's true, but it's not true in any particular way. So it's not true that it's big. It's not true that it's small. It's not true that it exists or that it doesn't exist or that it's real or it's fake or it's good or it's bad. Like none of those things. All of those are just the apparent dualities of the relative plane. All of those are the apparent potentialities that the absolute truth can take. Right? So see, the absolute truth is unlimited. It's infinite. Because it's absolute, which means there's no opposite to it, and it couldn't be any other way. Like the truth could never be false. If you're saying that the truth could be false, then that's already on the dualistic relative plane. The truth that I'm speaking about, it could never be false. It's true. Like the truth is true by its own nature, by definition. Right? So because it is absolute, because it's absolute and it's sovereign and there's nothing other than it, there's nothing to limit it. See, every limitation is a limitation that is being enforced by someone else or an other force. So for example, if we're saying, you can't go around and kill people because that's against the law. See, it was other humans that created the law, and that law now limits you. Or let's say you're limited by gravity or so on. See, that's the law. The laws of physics within this universe is something other than you, which is limiting you. So you need something else to limit you. So because the absolute truth is sovereign, absolute, and it's all by itself, and there's nothing other than it, then there's nothing to limit it, which causes it to be unlimited and infinite. It's literally infinite, right? And therefore it's formless. It's neither formless nor has a form. But you could say it's formless because in a sense it's unmanifest, right? When it's truly absolute, even though it's always absolute, but in a sense it's unmanifest, right? See, so every single form you see, like for example, this piece of paper, or this human, or this phone, or this glass of water, all of these are forms because they're limitation. What a form is its limit. What this is defined by what it isn't. A glass of water is not a mobile phone. A glass of water is not a human being. A glass of water is not a glass of Fanta. You see? So it's defined by everything that it isn't. And what a glass of water is it's limited. It's limited to this form. If it changes form, then it's not what we said it was anymore. If this completely transforms into something completely different, then it's not a glass of water anymore. If this human body dies and goes into the soil and becomes part of the earth, then it's not a human being anymore. See? And that's just, in a sense, energy changing its form. See? Because energy always transforms forms. It has no particular, energy has no particular form of its own, which is why it always shapeshifts into different forms. So every single form, everything in existence which manifests or incarnates into a form, into a particular form. And to be a form, it must be particular. Because if the form isn't particular, then it's formless. Right? Like this form is only what it is because it's particularly like this. It's made particularly out of glass. It's in this shape of like a cup. It's got water in it, not Fanta or whatever. See, because if it changed any of these things, then it wouldn't be what we're saying it is, which is a glass of water. So it has to be particular. A human is a very particular set of conditions. Otherwise, it's not a human anymore. You see? So it's all conditional. And it's all limited. The moment any form takes form, it's a limit because it must remain as itself. And that's survival. That's the game of life. It's remaining the way that you are in this flux of change, which is the universe. The universe is impermanent, so everything's changing. And you are, in a sense, trying to restrain and keep your form, which you are, right? So anything that has a form is limited. Anything that manifests is limited. And this is all within the relative plane. See, so the absolute truth doesn't have a form and it's not manifested. So I know that all of this sounds tricky and it seems like I'm just speaking nonsense, right? But I'm saying all of this for a reason because, as I explained before, for example, humans, we feed on other animals and plants and so on, and those animals feed on other animals and plants and all this shit. So everything is feeding off something else. That's the food chain, right? But why is that the case? Why do humans feed off animals and all this stuff? Is because we have a limited form, which is this body, which we've incarnated. And as I've explained, if it goes below a certain amount of energy threshold, then you're going to die, right? So to maintain this form, you have to keep on feeding it. But the only reason why we need to keep on feeding it to maintain it is because it's a limited form. This form is conditional. Everything in this universe is conditional, as I said. So just as this form is also conditional. It's humans act as if they exist absolutely, but they don't. If you existed absolutely, then you wouldn't need to try and survive. It would be impossible for you to die. There will be no conditions that would undermine you. But whereas in this human form, it's clear that no, you have to eat every day. You have to follow those conditions. You have to get then right amount of water. You have to get shelter and all these things. Otherwise, you're going to die. See, this is all conditional. It's not absolute. And because we're in these limited conditional forms, we have to keep on. See, in a sense, the absolute almost represents completeness. That's the completeness of everything. The absolute truth is the truth that is true, and it encapsulates everything, like infinity. But then the moment we incarnate into particular forms, see, because the forms are created by divisions within this infinite field of the absolute truth, which is formless. So the absolute truth is the infinite field, and the moment you create these divisions and schisms, then it creates these forms. Because as you can see, like, forms are created by boundaries. Like, you feel like this is a human and there's a boundary here, like by my skin or something. You think like that separates, even though that's actually, in truth, it's an imaginary boundary. But every single form, like that, see this phone, it has a boundary. Everything has a boundary. So it's created by these boundaries, right? And the moment we come into these limited forms with boundaries, we become incomplete. See, the whole, because your true self is the absolute truth, which is the whole field, which is everything, infinity. And the moment, see, and I've kind of explained this in another video before, like, imagine this is the whole field, which is not a really good representation because even this has a boundary, but imagine this spanned out forever. See, like, the moment, let's say we draw a circle, don't know if you can see that. Yeah, let's say we draw a circle, right? It might seem like, we just created only that circle, but no. See, now you created this form and you created its environment now, see, because that boundary creates the in and out. See? In and out. It's not like you just created this and then none, like, see, the moment you create one thing, you already create two things. You see, because reality can only be created by division. So that's why everything is dualistic, because you have the source, and then the moment you create a division, it gets split into two. That's why everything is dualities. That's why there's infinite dualities, up and down, left and right and wrong, all of this kind of stuff, right? So, and if this whole field is your true self, like if you're really the whole field, right? But then you create this, and then like this is the form that you incarnate as, like as a human. Like if let's say that's like your human self that you incarnate as, see how to identify with this, you've now excluded the rest of your true self. See, this is your whole complete self as the absolute truth, and now you're just a relative truth, a conditional truth. So you're God in a sense that's incarnated as a human, and you've limited yourself into a particular form. But to do that, you had to exclude the rest of yourself. So therefore now you're always going to be incomplete. So every single form is incomplete. That's the nature of the relative plane, is incompleteness. That's why no matter like how much, like if first you think you want this phone, you think, I just need that phone, and then everything will be complete. And then you get it, you're happy for a day or two, but then you get bored of that. You want something else. Now you think, I just need a girlfriend, then I'll be complete. Then you get a girlfriend, after a while you get bored of that. And then you think, I just need a house and maybe a holiday, like in the Maldives, then everything will be complete. And you see how the mind always moves the goalpost. And that's actually because really your desire to merge back with your infinite true self. And right now you're trapped in a limited form. So actually your desire is not for more. Your desire is for everything. Your desire is for everything, but you kind of do it in installments. You do it in installments. Like first, like let's say this is your domain, and then you expand it a little bit like that, and you expand it a little bit like that. And if you can look at animals, literally any like finite limited being. They're trying to expand their domain to, in a sense, encapsulate the whole of the universe. It's just that there's other limited beings who are also doing the same. And then when your domains clash, then that's what creates conflict. That's what creates war and all of this kind of stuff, right? And that's like all about territory and all of that kind of stuff. But all of this goes to say is that as soon as we become every single living being, this is not just humans, but like animals, humans, aliens, if they exist, any form, like anything that takes a form and incarnates is limited and incomplete, which is why it needs to keep on feeding on others and filling itself up with more to expand itself, in a sense. Because deep down, every single being knows that they are everything. And that's why they want to reunite with that. Right? But all of this goes to say, right, that every single form is limited. So, for example, if there is a Demiurge or Archons or something which is feeding off humanity, right? Like, if it's feeding off humanity, then that means that it's a limited form. See, one thing as well that humans kind of get wrong as well, or not get wrong, it's just these psychological tricks, right? So humans, yeah, where I think they go wrong as well is that see, we usually think of ourselves at the top of the food chain. And as a result, it's kind of like anytime we experience a force of nature which is above us, which has more power than us, and power is in a sense just more. Yeah, so power is in a sense just influence on the external environment. So when, for example, if we say a king has a lot of power, we're saying that they have more influence on the external world than others. See, everyone has an influence on the world, but if you have a larger sphere of influence, if your domain is increased and your actions affect more people or affects the environment more, that means you have more power. You have more influence on what's happening in the external field, or what appears to be the external field or the world, so to speak, right? So any kind of force of nature that humans experience that is above them in power, they straight away label as God. Like anything that's above them, they just think is God. So that's why, for example, if there was a demiurge or something like that, which is like, in a sense, and see, this is where I need to draw another little diagram. And this is where kind of the holons and the holographic universe comes into play. Like that's what I was explaining before. Just give me a sec, I'm just drawing something. So this in a sense looks like a bullseye, right? How can I put this? See, so this is just a map, and as I've said many times, the map is never the territory, and this is limited, so I can't really draw it perfectly because really, see, this point in the middle makes it seem like there's something which is the most internal or the lowest level, and the thing on the outside makes it seem like there's an outside, like a furthermost out level, like the biggest and the smallest, but there's actually not. You have to try and imagine this. Sorry, I don't know why it always does this. You have to try and imagine this as if like there's infinite like layers that goes out, and this dot you could zoom in like more, and there would be more. Like this point would just zoom out into another circle, and there would be a smaller point. So you could zoom in forever and zoom out forever, right? But we're just kind of just as a kind of scale thing, you could kind of think this is in. Why does it do this? You could kind of think this is more internal and that's more external, right? That's further out, that's further in. But there's no true bottom or true like top, right? This is just an analogy, right? So let me explain it. Just give me a moment. Trust me, it'll be worth it. Humans. So, yeah, so, and this again is also kind of representing the holons, right? So, for example, as I said, there's no true bottom, right? But let's just say, for example, this point represents insects, right? And then this larger one, this larger circle represents animals, the animals which feed off like insects, which are smaller than the animals, right? And then let's say this circle, which is larger than the animals, so humans are above animals, and we feed on the lower level, which is animals, which feeds on the lower level, which is insects. And then really, obviously here, as I said, it seems like there's a bottom, but you could zoom in more and then the insects are feeding off something else, like bacteria. And then you could zoom in forever and forever, and you can zoom out forever, right? So let's say, yeah, and then that's the humans. And then let's say now this one is the Demiurge or the Archons or whatever that's now feeding off the humans, which are feeding off the animals, which are feeding off this, and so on and so forth, right? See, essentially my point of the video is that it is possible, it really is possible that there is such a thing as the Demiurge or these Archons, which are above us in the food chain, more powerful than us, and they're feeding off us. And in reference to us, they may seem like gods because they're more powerful than us, but they're actually not God. They're not the absolute. They're not fundamental. And in fact, if they are feeding off us as humans, that means that they're also incomplete, like us humans, like animals. It's just that they seem like gods. And they seem complete and above us, like as gods, because they're larger than us in reference. Same way, if animals or insects was to look at humans, we would look like gods to them. Like if a little chihuahua or a little like worm or something, like if a worm looks at a human, that worm probably thinks that human's God. You see, it's just about in reference where you're measuring from. But the Archons aren't actually gods. They're not complete. They're also incomplete. And if they are feeding my whole thesis of this video, which I'll explain deeper further on as well, is that yes, it's possible that these Archons are feeding off humans, but it must mean that they are also limited and there's something larger than them feeding off them. See, because think about it. If something is feeding off, like humans eat to survive, animals eat to survive. Like if these Archons or these, like this Demiurge or whatever is feeding off humans, that means that it needs us to survive, which means that it's incomplete as well because it has a form. See, and the whole reason why I was speaking about the formlessness and all that and the forms and the unmanifest and manifest before is because the absolute truth, which is actually God in a sense, because it's the most fundamental thing, that doesn't have a form. It's not manifest. It's complete already, so it doesn't need extra energy to sustain it, because it is all of the energy, every single, like all the energy within the relative plane or within all of existence. That is the absolute truth. Like it's everything already. It doesn't need to eat to survive. Like you only need to eat to survive if you have a limited form. But the absolute truth is unmanifest. God is unmanifest. It's formless. It doesn't have a body that it needs to nourish. Do you understand? So, because of this, the Demiurge or these Archons or something, they can't be God, right? And see, because God people act as if God has an influence of this field or on this dream, but it actually doesn't. The absolute truth doesn't do any actions because it's not incarnate. Like you have to perform an action, you have to have a body. The God, like God doesn't have a body. Do you get what I'm saying? So God doesn't have any influence on the world. Yes, it created the potentiality for the world to exist, but it's not actually it's not really manipulating what's happening in the world. It, in a sense, created the world and it put its hands off the wheel and let the world run. Like it let it create itself. It just created the potentiality in a sense. That's all God did. It just clicked create and let it run. It's not actually second by second manipulating every single small detail. See, so once you realize that to perform an action, you must have a form, which means you must be limited. See, so humans have an influence on the field, animals have an influence. Let's say these Archons have an influence. That's because they have a limited form. They exist. See, God is true. God is the most fundamental thing and it's true, but it doesn't exist because to exist means to stand out from something else. Remember, as I explained, like with the circle, how everything's created through boundaries. See, like you could say that circle now exists because it has a boundary and it stands out from its environment. That's why I was saying it creates the in and out. See, existence is like something, is uniqueness. See, like you can say this human body exists because it stands out from the wall. It stands out from like this piece of paper. It stands out. And for something to stand out, there has to already be two things. The subject and the object. Me and you. See, it's like stands out from each other through the boundary. The boundary is what creates the separation. Right? But God, as I said, because it's not manifest, because it hasn't incarnated into any form, because it's not anything in particular. It's true. It's absolutely true. It's true always, but it's not true in any way. It's not any form in particular. It's formless. So it doesn't stand out from anything. That's why you could never see God. It's not because God doesn't exist. Like, it's not because God isn't true, but it's because God doesn't exist. You see? It's because everything is God. There's not a single, like, see, existence are just these imaginary boundaries within God. You see, so it's kind of like a fish in the sea. Like us, like imagine a fish swimming around. It's deep in the ocean and it's looking around like, where's the water? Where's the water? Like, because everything that it sees, like its whole environment is God. Its whole environment is water. You see? So it can't see it because there's nothing other than that. See? So there's not, like, God is absolute. That's what I keep on saying. On the absolute, like, there's nothing opposite to God. So, see, we understand what is hot and cold because we've experienced contrast. We've experienced hot, we've experienced cold. You see? So we understand things only by contrast. You can only measure or be conscious of something through contrast. But because God is absolute and there's only one of it and there's nothing other than that, there's nothing to compare against. So you'll never be able to like say, oh, that section is God. You can say that, but literally everything is God, you see? So that's why God doesn't exist. It's true, it's the most fundamental thing, but it doesn't exist. So it doesn't have any influence on the field. Like, it doesn't have any influence on what's happening in reality. And it doesn't have a form which it needs to sustain. So it wouldn't need to feed, it wouldn't need to do something as so petty as to feed off humans, which it created. Like, it's impossible that God is the Demiurge. Like, the most fundamental God, the absolute truth, like, that's not the Demiurge. You see what I'm saying? So something that's formless and infinite, like the absolute truth, which I would refer to as the true God, it's not incomplete, so it doesn't need to feed off us to complete it. or to sustain its form, because it doesn't have a form, it doesn't have a body, it's not manifest. Do you see? So anything that needs to feed off humans, it must mean that it has a form that it needs to sustain. And it needs to use our loosh or our whatever to like extract our energy to sustain it, which means it has a form which it needs to sustain. You see? And if it has a form that it needs to sustain, that means it's limited and it exists. And if it exists and it's limited, then that means it also had a beginning and it will also have an end. You see, the absolute truth doesn't have a beginning or an end. But to have a form, like this human body form, it was born and it's going to die. You see, every form arises and falls away. So it's not absolute. There was a time when the Demiurge was there, wasn't there, and there will be a time where it's not there. You see? So essentially what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that there's not a Demiurge. I'm just saying that if there is a Demiurge, then the only reason why it's feeding off us is because it is limited. It needs energy from us to sustain itself. And furthermore, there's something larger than it feeding off it. Do you understand? See, because like you get the most hungry when you're like in a deficit, right? You're incomplete, you're in a deficit. So you need to get that energy to fulfill you back up. See? So if this Demiurge is in a deficit and it needs human loosh to sustain it, then it must be in a deficit because something larger than it remember this holographic, and this goes on forever. There's infinite layers. So there's not a bottom or a top, right? So there's something larger than it, which is feeding off it. You see? And then whatever's feeding off the Demiurge, there's something larger than that feeding off that. And then what's feeding off that, like whatever is feeding off the thing that is feeding off the Demiurge, which is feeding off us, there's something larger than that feeding off that. You see, that's what I'm saying. It's a holographic. It's holographic and it's a fractal nature. Same way we feed off animals and they feed off like other animals like plants and that, and then that feeds off like, you see what I'm saying? Like, or like insects, and then insects feed off something else, like worms or something, and then they feed off bacteria, and then bacteria feeds off something else, and it zooms in forever. Everything is feeding off something smaller than it, and is being fed upon by something larger than it. You see? It's the game of predator and prey. And this is the Ouroboros, because the Ouroboros sign, that's actually the absolute. See, the absolute, because there's no opposite to it, like in a sense, it's creating itself and destroying itself simultaneously. It's a prey to itself and it's a predator to itself. It feeds upon itself because there's nothing other than it to feed upon. See, so as the absolute truth is, because it's complete and there's nothing opposite to it, every single thing that we see within the relative plane is just an incarnation or a permutation of the potential of the absolute truth, right? So we're just like a manifestation of the absolute, but in a limited form. So same way we're feeding off animals and so on, and it seems like we're feeding off something other than us, but animals, we are animals, because animals and humans are all part of the absolute truth. Like it's all the self. So when we're feeding on animals and animals are feeding on like something else, and when the Demiurge is feeding off us, it's not even that it's feeding, like we are different to the Demiurge. The Demiurge is made out of the same thing that we're made out of, and we're made out of the same thing that the animals are made out of, and that's absolute truth. You see, because the absolute truth is feeding upon itself. At the absolute level, there's nothing other than itself to feed off. It feeds off itself. That's the Ouroboros sign. That's like infinity. You see, like it creates itself and then it feeds off itself. Because there's nothing other than it to feed off. It's just that when it permutates down and like kind of incarnates in the limited dualistic plane, then it seems like humans are separate to animals and separate to insects and humans are like feeding off them, like animals which are different to humans. But actually, it's just the Ouroboros, like the Ouroboros sign manifesting in the lower plane, where it's just the infinite cosmic food chain. See, like usually we'll say in the food chain. Like I don't know. I could go online and get like an actual food chain kind of thing, but it's usually in a pyramid, right? And then it will be like have humans at the top, and then animals that kind of like span out, and then that will feed on that, and then that will feed on that, and then that will feed on that, so on and so forth. There's also certain circular ones where it's like an ecosystem, but it's usually like in a pyramid and so on, and it makes it seem like humans are at the top, and that there is like a particular species which is at the top of the food chain. That's how it makes it seem. But actually, what I'm saying is that if you look at it closely and at the absolute level, no matter like there's no one at the bottom of the food chain and there's no one at the top. Actually, every single species, every point of reference you take is in the middle. Like literally every single one. Every single point of reference or species has something that it's lower than it, which is its prey, and something larger than it, which is its predator. So humans are in the middle of the food chain. The Demiurge is in the middle. Whatever's feeding off the Demiurge is in the middle. Insects are in the middle, because there's always some like an infinite string of things which are on a lower order, like lower than that, and there's infinite things which are larger than that. See, because this is the consequence of the holographic nature and the holons and the fractal nature. That's just how reality takes form, because at the absolute level, as I said, it's neither formless nor has a form, and it's neither infinite nor infinite. And that's kind of why everything appears in this fractal like holographic nature, where, as I said, you're a part and a whole. See, you're in a sense you're complete. You're a complete human being, but you're also incomplete because you're just one part or a fraction of the human race. You see, like this arm is complete, but it's also incomplete because it's just a fraction, like one half of both of your arms, like if you get what I'm saying. And then like your full arm is in a sense complete, but it's just a fraction of your whole arm. Fraction, fractal. See, it zooms in and zooms out forever. There's no bottom and there's no top. And that's why you're always in the middle. And that's why in my earlier videos as well, I always spoke about the X and Y like coordinates, and where the 0, 0 intersect, and how you can think of reality as a dynamic scale. Because no matter, like, consciousness is always just a measurement device. Consciousness is a capacity for the absolute truth to recognize itself as being true to lower and higher degrees. And the way it measures itself or perceives itself is by using contrast between 2 points of reference. See, the absolute truth neither exists nor doesn't exist. So what it does to understand what it is, it creates two dualities, neither of which are absolutely true, but both are partially true. Neither of it are the absolute truth, but it uses 2 points of reference, like one to the right of it, one to the left of it. Both aren't what it is, like both of them isn't. But to understand what it is, you must understand what it isn't. So it takes what it isn't to the right and to the left, and then it compares against both, and then it understands in a sense what it is. So one sec, let me just check my notes again, see if there was anything that I missed out. Okay, one sec, just give me a moment. Yeah, so I think I covered most of it. Um, so kind of to conclude again, so as I said, like humans, because we think that we're at the top, anything above us in power, we kind of label as God or assume as God and so on. It's almost is similar to how, let's say you see a magic trick and you don't understand how it was done yet. They didn't show you how it was done. See, then it seems really like magic. Like things that you don't understand seem like magic. When you understand it, then you realize it's not magic and so on. Da da da. So it's kind of similar like that. Humans, because they don't understand the holographic nature of reality, they think that everything that is above them must be the ultimate. But actually, no, there could be something above humans, larger than us, with a larger sphere of influence on reality than us, which also isn't the ultimate. It's just a level above us, but there's levels above that as well, you see? And the levels go on for infinity. It goes up for infinity and down for infinity. And because it goes up and down for infinity, see, every reference point again is the center. That's why that's why I just spoke about this 0, 0 point. And because there's infinite coordinates in this infinite field, like this field of consciousness, which you could think of as a quantum field, there's no edge, or you could think of it as space or whatever. See, there's no edge, as I've said many times. So there's no center, but any point you take will appear to be the center. So everything is always a reference point, and that's what I was explaining about the dualities. How it takes one to the right and one to the left, and one above and one below, and then see consciousness always kind of measures in this dualistic way to understand what it is. And yeah, so what I kind of explained, where every single species or point of reference is in the middle of the food chain, and the food chain goes infinitely up and down. And in a sense, that's just the absolute truth manifesting as the Ouroboros feeding on itself, because every single species, different species, even though they seem separate to each other, they're actually all just manifestations of truth or of God. You see, they're all just different manifestations. It all comes from the same potentiality. And to me, this makes the most sense. If there is a demiurge, then there's something above that feeding off the demiurge, and there's something above that, and it goes on forever, and it goes down forever. However, if that's not the case, there's one other possibility, which I think, if the demiurge does exist, but there's nothing above it feeding off it, then the only thing that the demiurge could really be is the ego. That's actually what the demiurge is the ego, which is the false self. The truth self is the absolute truth. The self which is itself, unconditionally, acausally. That self. The universal self, the I. Like the I that I refer to, the I that you refer to as yourself. When you say, oh, I did this, or I did that. And when I say, I did this and I did that, that's the same I. That's the universal I. The absolute self, right? That's the true self. And then the false self is the ego, which you think that you're like, when you say I did this, you think that you're actually referring to like your human body. You're saying I as a human did this, right? Or I as a person did this, or he, him, like I, me, and like he's him, like I, me, and you. Like, you did that as a human. I did this as a human. See, that's referring to the ego, the false self, which is in a sense anchored to your physical, limited human body, where you believe yourself to be this human body. And the ego is in a sense a dynamic operating system which doesn't really exist. It doesn't have any substance, but it's a dynamic system which appears to exist. It can think thoughts and imagine things and have memories and use these anchors or constants to appear to itself as if it has self-congruency, and and it exists and permeates through time. Like your personality, the person who you believe yourself to be, that's the false self. That's not really who you are. You actually are the true self, your truth itself, which doesn't have a form, which was never created or ever born. But this human body, which was born and created, which you believe yourself to be, but you actually aren't. The self which appears to be you, but it actually isn't you, right? That's the false self. That's the ego. And the ego, all it is just the human operator. So even animals kind of have an ego. It's not as complex as humans, which you can tell because they, for example, if you show them a mirror, a lot of like the lower developed animals, they won't recognize that the image in the mirror is what appears to be themselves. They won't realize that that's their own body. But humans can recognize that. And more higher order animals, like probably some dogs and so on, can recognize that that's themselves in the mirror. And that's just kind of a higher level order of complexity of ego where it can recognize itself, or at least recognize its own image of itself, what it believes itself to be. Because actually you're not the human body, and that dog isn't actually that dog body, right? And this ego, it doesn't really exist, but its whole mechanism is to appear as if it exists. And its own nature is to be incomplete because it's attached to and identified with this incomplete body. And as that's incomplete, it's always trying to complete itself. So same way as humans, as we're feeding off animals and animals are feeding off something else, that's the ego trying to survive. Like the ego is a survival mechanism. The ego needs to be there for this human body to survive. Because see, there's not actually an individual human here. There's not really such a person as Nathaniel. But the brain needs to create this mechanism where it dynamically like operates to where it seems like there is such a thing as Nathaniel. Because if this human didn't have a self-image of itself, then the human body would just die. Because see, I wouldn't even, if I didn't believe myself to be this body, if I didn't believe myself to be this human which needs to survive as myself, then I wouldn't be eating food. I wouldn't be trying to defend myself. You see, like I would just die. I would just collapse. So the ego needs to be there. So see, if we're saying that there isn't really like an actual metaphysical or actual like demiurge that's higher order than humans that exists in this relative plane that's feeding off us, if we're going to say that that doesn't exist, then, if we're saying that that doesn't exist with other higher order beings feeding off that, then the only other plausible explanation to me is that the demiurge is in a sense referring to that ego, the false self, which doesn't really exist but appears to exist, and to sustain its false existence, it must feed off others to reinforce to itself that it does exist. Its whole mechanism is to appear as if it exists when it doesn't exist, and to perpetuate itself. And see, that's in a sense what drives the humans to feed off others and drives all beings to feed off others. And you could call that the evil force or the devil, which I went into that a little bit with the devil as a scapegoat video. But yeah, as I said, this whole video was more speculative. Where I'm speaking about the absolute truth, that's not speculative. That's the only thing on this channel that I always will remain certain on, and I'll always stand for that. And if you want to learn deeper on that, as I said, check my earlier videos. But the rest of the things where I'm kind of making deductions off that basis, that's more speculative. So this may not necessarily be the case. However, to me, this is what seems like makes the most sense. That, in a sense, it's just a fractal nature, and it's like a cosmic food chain, and everything is feeding on prey, which is on a lower order than itself, but is being fed upon by something higher order than itself. That's why because we wouldn't need to feed on something lower than us if we weren't in a deficit, in a sense, that we needed to fill up. And we wouldn't be in a deficit if there wasn't something else feeding off us, you see. And in a sense, the Demiurge doesn't even need to be like a physical being. Like, it could just be the force of nature, because like the what's larger than humans could just be the actual physical environment. That's what you could almost say is the Demiurge as well. It's actually just the physical universe, even though the universe is not physical, but what the apparent physical universe, what appears to be the physical universe. But yeah, so I wanted to just conclude again to say that all of this is all appearing within the relative plane. So it's all within the dream. You could also watch my video, The Dream is Not Deep. I mean, Absolute Truth is Not Deep. The Dream is Deep. That's actually it's quite a short video, 15 minutes as well. That kind of touches on that as well. But you see, all of this, what I'm speaking about, is all within the relative plane or the dream, right? And in reality, the relative plane, the dualistic plane, this dream, I'm speaking as if it exists, right? I'm speaking as if it's real. And I'm saying, like, if it is real, the relative plane or this dream, if we take it to be real, then according to the fundamental truth, which is the absolute truth, this is how the dream unfolds or manifests as a result. And this makes the most sense of how the dream operates. Even though the dream isn't real, this is how the unreal dream operates, right? But that's only if we take it even to be real. And really, if we're speaking only about the real truth, if we want to get down to bare bones, there's not even such a thing as the Demiurge. There's not even such a thing as humans or animals or insects or anything. All these distinctions are imaginary and false. They don't exist unless you, as the self, imagine them to exist. You see? See, this dream is always in a flux. It's in a state of impermanence. The absolute always remains as itself. But the relative is, in a sense, as I said, the absolute, there's no opposite to it. It's absolute. But what the relative is like a false opposite to the absolute. It's like an imaginary opposite. And because the absolute truth always is itself, and in a sense is like infinitely the same. It's like, it's always the same. Like, the absolute is sameness. So the dream, which is in a sense opposite to the absolute, or the relative plane, which is opposite to the absolute, must always be different. That's why it's always different. Every frame is different from the last. That's why it's always in flux. So there's not really one particular way that the dream is. You can't say that the dream is this way or it is that way, because the dream is always in flux and it's always different depending upon which point of reference you take, you see. So really, speaking about the relative plane or the way the dream is or the way life is or existence, like, it's of no consequence, because life, existence, the dream, like this universe, it doesn't actually really exist. It's not really real. It's actually just a dream. Like, it really is a dream. It really is just a fantasy. Only the truth is true. See, when we bring it back to bare bones, the level that I'm comfortable saying is absolutely certain is just only the absolute truth, which is the truth that is true. The truth that is true, not in any particular way, but is true. That's all you can say about the truth at the absolute level, is that it's true. Only the truth can be true. You can't say existence is true. You can't say fantasy is true. No, only truth is true. See, it is itself, which means falsehood is false. Existence exists, right? Like you can't say that humans exist or animals exist or the Demiurge exists at the absolute level. No, none of those things exist. Only existence itself can exist. Only existence can exist. What else could exist other than existence itself? See, the logical mind won't like to grasp that, because it will kind of reject that or say it's an invalid statement because it references itself. And many people have this thing to where it says, oh, a statement must refer to something other than itself. But that's completely false. There's no rule in existence that states that. Like, what could exist other than existence? What could be real other than reality? Like, fantasy isn't real. That's what I'm saying. Fantasy is a fantasy. At absolute level, this is the only thing that makes sense. Truth is true. Only the truth can be true. So when we're speaking about the Demiurge or humans and all this stuff, like, none of that stuff really is true. It's only apparently true. That's only if we take the dream, this dream world, to even be real. But it isn't. So really, there's not really a Demiurge or humans, or there's not a Demiurge feeding off humans that's at the top of the food chain, or like Demiurge feeding off humans and something else feeding off that. Like, really, none of that exists. All of that's part of the imagination. It's just that this whole video is just to say, yes, the relative plane isn't really real, but if we take it to be real, if we kind of subscribe to it, then the way it's most likely to be, or the most accurate way it would unfold, would be this way as a consequence of the absolute truth, which is actually the only thing that's true. See, so in the end, really, all of that stuff, it doesn't exist. Demiurge and all of this stuff. Even humans don't exist. I don't exist. You don't exist. All of that distinction here, where you think like, this is where I end and like something else begins, like this boundary here that separates me from the chair or separates me from that sofa behind me, like, that's an imaginary boundary that doesn't exist. That boundary only exists in the minds of man. You're imagining it. If you don't imagine it, that boundary is not there. There's not a difference between like subject and object, or like organism and environment. Like, the organisms and the environment are merged into one. There's not even a difference. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to even interact with each other. Just for the fact that I'm able to communicate with you shows that I am connected to you. Like, me and you, we are the same. Reality is just communicating with itself. Communication is communicating to itself. Like, there's no one else to communicate to. The self is absolute. And see, if you say, oh no, there's someone else, like, you don't. If the self is absolute, like what I'm saying, then no, there's no one else to communicate with. And if you disagree with that, then you clearly don't know what it means to be absolute, because absolute means that it's absolute. There's nothing other than that. It's not like relatively, like I exist relatively and then you exist relatively. See, that's on the relative plane. Like, we could say that as humans, but as the absolute self, where the self is the only thing that is itself. Like, what could be itself other than itself? You see, if you're saying itself is other, like, no, that's ridiculous. That's contradict. Like, only itself is itself. Only the self is itself. Only the truth is true. Only existence exists. Only reality is real. So this is just kind of me concluding, bringing it back to certainty again. This is where that, like, this conclusion, that's not speculative. That's me saying that is the way that it is, absolutely and certainly. However, everything in the middle, like from the beginning, in between the middle of the video and this ending of the video, everything between that was speculative. However, it seems to me that that's the most most likely case. So you guys can let me know what you think about that. And I think I'm going to leave that one there.